And the geneticist, who was the head geneticist of DC Children's Hospital, happened to live in Alexandria, Virginia. And he came and answered the on-call for me and came and talked to me. And these words shaped the way I think about my life and the way I think about our mission in the Bay Area Christian Church to include. I want to help you understand what Down syndrome is in case you don't understand. He said, I don't. All I know is about life goes on and this kid who seems to be doing a lot of things. And he goes, well, there's no guarantee either way about the development of your kid. But he goes, let me tell you this. You first need to start here. You have a baby boy who happens to have Down syndrome.
So what if the people who are often overlooked in church, people who have disabilities, are the ones God calls indispensable? What if disability isn't a barrier to ministry, but it's a doorway to rediscover the heart of Christ? See, including people who have disabilities isn't just about access, it's about transformation. Because we live in a world that is shaped by ability, it's shaped by performance. Well, the church has a chance to lead differently. And in this episode, we're going to explore how embracing those with disabilities not only honors the image of God in other people, not only helps restore human dignity, but it can help reshape our communities, how it can help renew our mission and help our churches bring young millennials, Gen Zers, and Gen Alpha back into the church with a new significant purpose. Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Myers. This show is called the Truth Changes Everything podcast. Essentially, I call up people I'm really interested in learning from, and then I record the conversation so you can listen in too. And my guest today is Russ Ewell. Russ is an author, he's a minister, he's a social entrepreneur, and he's one of the pastors for Bay Area Christian Church. He's a father to sons with autism and Down syndrome, and he has found purpose in overcoming human limits through family, faith, and technology. He's the CEO of Digital Scribbler. He's the founder of Hope Technology Group, the founder of eSports, and the founder of Deep Spirituality. So in all of this, he's created tools and communities that empower people who would ordinarily just be on the margins. In his work in all of these areas, in inclusive sports and tech and spiritual leadership, well, they've earned him the Jefferson Award and a Congressional citation. He is a guy who inspires transformative thinking. I think you're going to find this conversation transformational. I think you're going to want to be a better leader. I think it's going to help you grow in your personal relationship with God. So let's welcome Russ Ewell to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. Russ Ewell, welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on, Jeff. I'm excited to be with you.
We just discovered before the show began that we're both from Michigan, and we have been sent out into the world to evangelize. I love what you're doing, the Bay Area Community Church, what you're doing with people who have disabilities. This is going to be such an important conversation. If we genuinely believe that every human being has dignity as an image bearer of God, then we want to hear what you have to share. So I'm really, really thankful.
Well, I'm excited to be here, and I think I'm excited about your work that you do with especially the rising generations, because I think they're gonna change the world. In my work, I'm part of obviously the Bay Area Christian Church, and we have 9 different campuses. I'm in the campus that's the average age is the youngest, about 25 to 27 years old. A lot of teenagers, a lot of campus students, and one of the things we do is we work hard to see them develop. But one of the essential parts of helping their development as people and as leaders is inclusion and working with those with special needs. And so that's a big part of what we do, and I think it connects with your mission in many ways.
Well, I wanted to ask a question, first of all, just about the church, because I know you're not only a pastor, but you're an author and you're a social entrepreneur. But when you're mostly working with young adults, teens and 20s, around the country right now, we're seeing significant growth in churches, and it seems to be mostly from young adults. But then you have the Bay Area, which is it's not known as the Bible Belt. I don't know another way to put that. Do you see the same thing happening in your congregation?
Well, I think the focus we have had for many years going way back, is one, I serve as executive minister of the church, and there are two couples along with my wife. There's two couples who lead the West Bay and the East Bay. For not those not familiar with the Bay Area, the East Bay would be like Oakland. You may have heard of that, or Walnut Creek, and then the West Bay would be San Francisco, and then basically all of Silicon Valley would be that. And so my particular focus years ago was on replacing myself and making sure that I didn't become a person who wanted to be like the center of everything for the rest of my life and nobody else get a chance. And so I began looking at younger people, and some of that was my kids or millennials and Gen Z. And so I said, hey, they have great potential, but they need to be given a runway. So we've been doing that for a long time. So when you ask the question, are the trends up? I can't say that I see them significantly up here because we've never stopped with that focus, but
Right.
I do see it significantly up around the country. And I do pay attention to that. And people I talk to who lead churches in other places, and people are asking the question, how can we reach out to them more? But the thing that I most notice is their interest in the Bible. And I think it's because the world around us is so confusing and conflicted and polarized that people are looking for answers about, okay, well, how do I look at life? How do I live life? And how do I get a lens through which I can process all of this? And so I have seen all over a hunger for the word of God. And I think that to me is a profound thing, because I'm a big believer. And if people get into the word, they're going to become who they need to be, and the churches will become who they need to be.
Mm. That's so great. Well, I love hearing that mission. And I love the fact that you're inviting the young adults who are participating there into a mission. I want to talk about specifically how that mission relates to serving those who have disabilities. And as you're a social entrepreneur, you're a minister, you are an author, but you're also a dad to two special needs sons. And I would love to just hear your story just a little bit. And then I want to talk about how congregations can be welcoming to people with disabilities.
Yeah, I would love to tell it. And it goes back some years when we first had our firstborn, Jonathan. He was born I worked in D.C. for a while. My wife and I worked in Washington, D.C. and lived there. And when we were there, Jonathan was born in Alexandria, Virginia, and we were going through the whole process of, pregnancy and getting ready, all the exciting things that go on when you're about to give birth, or when your wife's about to give birth. I wasn't doing anything, but we were in the delivery room, yeah, after some hours of labor, and Jonathan was born, and the attending pediatrician looked up and said, "You do know your son has Down syndrome." Now, my wife immediately, her face was surprised. I didn't know what Down syndrome was. And I think, especially at that time in the 90s when he was born, I think a lot of people wouldn't have known what Down syndrome was. The only thing I knew about Down syndrome was I knew there was a popular television show at the time called Life Goes On that had one of the stars that had Down syndrome. And so I was like, okay, I don't even know what this is, but it doesn't sound like it's a good thing. And so he had to be airlifted to Washington, D.C. Children's, because a lot of children that are born with Down syndrome either have a hole in their heart — he did not have that — or they can have duodenal atresia, which is a blockage in your intestines, which if it's not repaired, they can't get nutrition, and obviously they would not live. And so he got that surgery right away. And so I had to drive over to DC hospital. Now, well, the important part of the story was, before I took off, is I was sort of trying to figure out, okay, what is this? Where am I at? I was calling friends and saying, I gotta go to the hospital and figure this out. And the geneticist, who was the head geneticist of DC Children's Hospital, happened to live in Alexandria, Virginia. And he came and answered the on-call for me, and came and talked to me. And these words shaped the way I think about my life and the way I think about our mission in the Bay Area Christian Church to include. He said, I want to help you understand what Down syndrome is in case you don't understand. He said, I don't. All I know is about Life Goes On and this kid who seems to be doing a lot of things. And he goes, well, there's no guarantee either way about the development of your kid. But he goes, let me tell you this. You first need to start here. You have a baby boy who happens to have Down syndrome.
Hmm.
And he goes, I want you to understand that. He is your son. He is the baby boy, but it just happens to be that he has Down syndrome. From that moment on, he helped me see my son as a human being. And I think that's one of the crucial elements of what we do now. So fast forward, at 8 years old, he and I were in a little league. I wanted to have him be in sports because I was in sports in the great state of Michigan, and I played little league and all that. And so I wanted to be in there, and we went to the first event. They had it was a great baseball league, but they had a special needs team, which one of my friends had told me about. And when I went, we were in the back and we were really separated from everybody else. And all of his other friends who were typical were on the other teams.
Hmm.
And so it was a great experience. But after about 4 or 5 weeks, I was like, this isn't how I grew up. I grew up with my friends playing sports with their parents on the sidelines, with my parents on the sidelines. And I said, hey, I got to do something because this isn't. I was driving him home one time and I was thinking about this isn't exactly what I was looking for. And I looked up in the mirror and he didn't look, but the rearview mirror, and he was in the back. And I was like, it doesn't look like he's excited about this either. And he was like 8 years old. And so I went to work and I ended up reading an article that said that soccer is a faster developing sport and more popular in the world because hand to eye coordination is more difficult than foot to eye coordination. And when I heard that, I talked to a friend of mine who played high level soccer and a number of them who played college and pro soccer. And I said, hey, could we start a soccer league? Closing up the story, I then began with 8 kids and 8 coaches, something called e-soccer, where we would include special needs kids with typical kids, and those kids playing together would build friendships that we plan to be lifelong, and that they would also learn how to play soccer. And the kids who were typical, we give them extra coaching so they could be great at soccer. Fast forward to today, we have a partnership with the Earthquakes where they're involved, and thousands of kids have gone through our program, and it's all around the world. It's in the Philippines, it's in Africa, it's in India, where special needs kids are coached by their peers and by adults who have soccer skills. This is transformed into, we then did e-hoops, and we have a partnership with the Golden State Warriors here. And so kids with special needs, campuses like University of San Francisco, St. Mary's, they've all gotten involved. The Cal football team has gotten involved, and we have e-football. So all this has come out of it, and it's helped us be able to build an environment where we do good in the community with this kind of inclusion, but it also generated by the hearts and lives of the people in our church. So that's my story and the story of how it's evolved into what it is today.
Yes, and what it's evolved into today, esports, is an incredible mission, and families with special needs children don't feel like they've got to go over here to do something separate. That everything is integrated into the community the way God designed it. I love this. I'd love to talk about congregations as well, because I know that congregations, every church I've ever been a part of, said that they wanted to welcome families that are affected by disability. But I think a lot of times they feel unprepared. What were the moments in your own church experience that first convinced you that, man, something is wrong here? My sons are getting left on the margins.
Really thoughtful question, because that's exactly, you described exactly how it feels when you walk in your own church and you're the minister of that church and you realize that your wife can't put your kid in children's ministry. And then you begin to realize that there's a whole bunch of people whose kids can't go into children's ministry, but they're not ministers, and that they're not coming to church at all. Or they're going to church, finding out that from their point of view, they're not welcome, so they stop going to church. And so what we did is we said, well, this isn't going to work. And my wife and I talked and came up with the idea of the spiritual resource ministry. And the spiritual resource ministry is creating a children's ministry that is inclusive, just like sports. Why is that important? Because we have hundreds of people come to our church every year. It might be more than hundreds, but hundreds of people come to our church every year because they know that when they walk through that door and they go to children's ministry, there are people there who have been trained and are prepared to be able to include their kids with the other kids. We've worked hard to create a culture in our church where not just the teenagers and the campus students in esports, where they volunteer to do good, but people in our physical church are welcoming of both parents and kids. What it did for us is it made me capable of being effective, because rather than being preoccupied with what's going on with my son, I'm able to relax and go, okay, let me go do my work and my job of serving others. But then what we discovered over the years is that people felt the same way. We've had hundreds of people say, I've never been able to go to church before and not be pulled out of church by the children's ministry workers because they didn't
Mm.
know what to do with my kid. And some of them, we have people come to our church who aren't really interested in becoming a Christian, honestly, but it's one of the greatest social experiences they have. So they just keep coming. Some of them are atheists and agnostics, but they've never had an experience for their family like that. So that question you ask is so well asked and so thoughtful, and I appreciate you asking it. And believe it or not, it took a little bit for my wife and I to figure out, oh, this is how we feel. And then to help other people in the church understand this is how thousands of people feel, and we can change the world if we lean into this.
I'd love to hear more about the kind of training that people might go through, because I think my ears perked up at that. And I'm sure a lot of people who are watching or listening were thinking the same thing. Oh, we can be trained to be more effective at this. It's not just that we have hearts to want to welcome people with disabilities, but we can actually know how to serve them well. Talk a little bit about how that would happen for a congregation.
Yeah, I think, well, everything starts small. And the reason I alluded to esports, and for people to understand about the Bay Area Christian Church, we have two simple mantras or mottos or whatever you would want to call it that we live by. We want to make God known and we want to do good. And we believe that's what Jesus did, that Jesus was someone who made God known, but he did good. And crowds gathered because of the good Jesus did. And once the crowds gathered, he told them, hey, here's the secret, the message behind the good, which is the gospel. And so that sort of is how we think about it. And that therefore the training is really about, first, are you going to be a Christian? Are you going to love your neighbor? Are you going to be the good Samaritan? Are you going to have the mindset that whatever I'm going through in my life is something I can utilize to help other people in their lives? We educate them first on just talking about simple things like, the unemployment rate among special needs people is 75%, as opposed to typical people is 38%. That 4.1 million people who receive some sort of benefits from the government to be able to sustain themselves financially, they can't afford an apartment with that amount of money. That 84% of disabled people with low incomes are eligible for housing assistance, but they don't get it. In other words, there's a lot of things that aren't being done for the community, even that are available to them. And so the training begins first by, from the pulpit, educating people about this is a part of our community that oftentimes is overlooked. And there are a lot of other parts of the community that can speak, but oftentimes this community, it can even not have a voice, either audibly not have a voice. My own boys have challenges with verbal communication, but it can also not have a voice because they're not centrally powerful. If you're in a wheelchair, it may not be that anyone is listening to you or wanting to put you out there. If you struggle with any kind of disability, you may not have the platform from which to speak. And so we try to make sure we educate our church first. Second, we look for volunteers that have skill. Oftentimes in our congregations, we have occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, special needs teachers, parents of special needs kids, and we get them together and get them working in these ministries and then training people. It begins a lot with first being able to not be afraid that you're going to make a mistake, say the wrong thing, or do the wrong thing with someone with special needs. Any kind of engagement is good. Now, sometimes people's feelings can get hurt, like a parent like me can be like, oh man, you said the wrong word, or I feel, but we have to get through that because that's part of the education process. And so we try to create a zone where people know, hey, these folks are learning, and as they learn, they may make mistakes, but they're not mistakes of exclusion. They're mistakes of inclusion as they learn how to work with your kid. And then we start to teach them socially. How do you interact? How do you approach? If this kid has a sensory challenge, meaning he gets overwhelmed by noises and sounds and crowds, how do you approach them? How do you engage a kid who doesn't have the ability to communicate? My company, I launched a company called Digital Scribbler, which creates software for kids who have verbal challenges. And so we teach them how to interact with those kids using that software. And so you do with the social. And then we also try to encourage a lot of people to volunteer for the good we do, the esports programs, because then they get real-time active involvement with special needs kids. But we educate, and we put people in environments where they can learn. We bring in professionals and parents to teach them. And that soup seems to have been able to create a brew of positive effect on the lives of those with special needs.
Mm. I love the phrase that you used. If we're going to make mistakes, but make mistakes of inclusion rather than exclusion. And it makes me think that probably as churches go through a process of asking themselves, how are we serving the disabled? There are a lot of things, maybe hidden assumptions that block inclusion of people with disabilities. So maybe assumptions about worship or productivity or what have you. Can you talk about some of those things?
Yeah, I absolutely can. I think, one of I'm a routine person, and I've been that way for a long time. Organized schedule, do this time, that kind of thing. And oftentimes, I don't want my routine disrupted. And I think one of the things that often happens is people can feel disrupted. Well, we will have at our service that I go to, like I said, we have 9 campuses, and I'm part of the one that's one of the youngest. Is we have autistic kids there, and sometimes they'll get up in the middle of the service while I'm speaking, and they'll start walking around.
Mm-hmm.
We're good with that. That's not a problem. I have one kid who's been visiting recently. He's his whole family's been visiting church, and he'll after the songs are done and we've done singing, he'll continue to sing the lyrics a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
During the service. Everybody's gotten used to it. Everybody's comfortable with it. And everybody thinks it's kind of funny because he'll just keep humming along. And even when I'm speaking, I don't always speak, but even when I'm speaking, he'll be out there humming the most recent song, or he'll catch on to one of the things I say and then he'll repeat it. We've got an environment where people look at that and say, that's not disruption, that's inclusion. And
Mm-hmm.
once you associate yourself with the idea that, hey, we're giving an opportunity for a young man and his family to hear the gospel that would not hear it otherwise, because in some places they say, well, you're disrupting worship. And we can go back to all the different things in the Old Testament where, David was dancing and that was considered by one of his wives to be bad and not good. And sometimes our interpretation of worship is based on how we feel instead of our interpretation of worship being based on how God feels. And what God feels is when we are including people, that kind of worship is what he's all about. It's the book of Isaiah when it talks about fasting. What is fasting? It's not just going without food, it's becoming a better person and doing good things. I think some of the other assumptions very quickly are people can, like I said, they can be afraid they're going to make a mistake with someone with special needs. Another thing is they can just, I think there's strange things that happen where people can be afraid if I'm around them, I'll either catch it or I'm uncomfortable. I don't like being around them. And we have to work through those things. And sometimes people they can't work with special needs adults and kids right away because they have to overcome some of these things. You know what? That's totally fine. That doesn't mean they're a bad Christian. That doesn't mean they're a bad person. It means that they have to learn and grow. When I was a kid, I used the R word in school and made fun of my friends. I'm not some holier than thou guy. I just happen to be born into a mission, born into a calling. And I'm trying to tell everybody, hey, you can make a difference in this area no matter where you're at on the sort of spectrum of understanding the folks in this group and how to include them.
Mm. One thing I love about the programs that you're doing is that they aren't just programs. There's a real focus on life mentoring, on discipleship, relationships. How does, because if what you're saying is to be applied, I'm just thinking of hundreds of thousands of churches that are in the United States. What we think of as success in ministry is not, it needs to be redefined. Maybe. We might need to think of our budget differently, how we recruit volunteers differently, how we measure impact differently. But I'd love for you to just focus in on that for a minute, just that life on life aspect of this. We're not just talking about we have a program for this group or we have a program for this group.
Yeah, I think, boy, there's a lot of profound things that you're asking in that question. And I'm not necessarily going to go in the right order, but I'm going to speak to something that I think is a passion for you. We have so many young leaders in our church from Gen Z and millennial because of this.
Mm.
Our goal was to have half of our campuses be led by Gen Z or millennial, and we've got 2 more years to go, and we're pretty much to the 50% mark already, and a lot of that is because of this involvement with special needs kids. It teaches service. It teaches a heart of compassion. Um, And so what comes to my mind immediately is young people and the need for young people to lead in the church. And I think this is one of the areas where I think that, and I know I'm not directly answering your question, but I want to speak on this because it's so important to what we do. I don't think the future of the country or the future of the world is bright unless we have young people in that Gen Z group and that millennial group and eventually Gen Alpha who come in with a passion and, as you've talked about, a worldview that says, I can see through all the entanglements and the weeds that are out there, all the misinformation and confusion that's out there, and I can understand the power of Christ, and not just the power of Christ to help me in my life, but the power of Christ to help every other life. So to us, inclusion is not about just special needs people. Inclusion is about the force of the gospel to enter a dark world and transform how we think about the world, what opportunities there to make a difference in the world. And so what happens in our churches, when I get an 8-year-old son, like I talked about earlier, playing with kids and getting included and being, as you said, mentored and taught, what happens is now he's been in multiple weddings, goes on dates. Every week, his friends come, and some of them are married now with kids. They come to our house and they have dinner at our house because they want to make sure they don't lose touch with him. Two of his friends had kids recently, and one of the first things they did, they said, we got to bring our son and daughter. One had a son and the other had a daughter, and we got to bring them over because Jonathan needs to hold them. And I was kind of nervous, like, okay, hang on a minute here. Let's not, but they were insistent on we got to have pictures. We want Jonathan to know them. Another one of his friends, every Sunday after church is over, he brings his son out since his son was 1 year old to talk to Jonathan, to sit in the car with him before Jonathan leaves and before he leaves. And these people have all become leaders in our church. They run digital, actually, the digital work we do. So I think what comes to my mind when you're talking, and I guess part of it's because it's your mission and I can tell how passionate you are about it, is I just want people to know that young people are going to change the world, and this is the evidence of it. And so when people ask, what do I do in my church, or how can my church get this? How can I redefine how I think about growth? I was trained that growth is numbers. How big is your church? How quickly can you get it big? What numbers can you tell us? Our church is big, so I'm not real worried about that. What I'm worried about is the quality of its ability to exist past my existence. And I think that comes down to,
Yes.
will Gen Z and will millennials and will Gen Alpha care? What I see in this generation is a great deal of hope. They're concerned, in my opinion, a lot about people, about the environment they live in. There's a mission heart inside this generation. And if we tap into that, I think our churches will get better and all around. And we'll get some of that, I'm older, so we'll get some of that 80s, church growth mentality redefined to be not just church health, but church impact, both inside and out the church, inside and out of the church, which is what the world needs. I think the polarization, the anger, the hate, it's because Christ is not involved in enough people's lives, and we need to get that done. And I think the coming generation can do it. And for us, special needs adults and kids, yeah, I benefit in my personal life, makes it better. But I benefit by seeing all these young people step up and lead because they captured the sense of Christ by living like him and doing good for others instead of thinking only about doing good for themselves.
I'll affirm what you're saying is true. The young adults who I talk to who've left church, the number one reason they leave is because of relationships. And then I talk to young adults who come back to church after they've been out for a while, and the number one reason they come back is relationships. They are not just looking for a place to come and sit for 2 hours on a Sunday morning. They're looking for a life mission.
Yeah.
In fact, the young adults I talk to, they're usually pretty blunt and honest with me. And I'm grateful for that. But they'll say, look, if I come in and sit and I leave and nobody knows I was there and nobody knows if I came back, then what is the point? Because I can go entertain myself by watching a movie instead. Or I can entertain myself by sleeping in till 11 o'clock and going to lunch and put on my nice shirt, like I've been at church. But if I want to be part of something, it's got to be something that's going to make a difference. I just love that. And we see it here at Summit Ministries. We welcome students with disabilities to attend our programs. And then we just work with the families. What kind of help can we need? But those students are going to be in small groups with everybody else, at the sports field with everybody else. And, it's included in everything that you do, but it gives a balance and I don't know, a sense of grace maybe that I see in programs where we have students, especially those who, are physically disabled, maybe wheelchair bound, or young people who are autistic. Because when you got an active youth, young adult program, it's loud. It can be disturbing and disruptive. And how do you develop that? How do you handle that in a way that helps autistic students feel comfortable? So this is so good. Well, I'd love to talk about. I guess as we kind of pull this all together, and I think you kind of tapped into this with your last statement that you see Gen Z, even some of the younger millennials, the rising generation, Gen Alpha, being people who are going to change the world. And I know a lot of people say that, but I really sense from what we're talking about here that disability inclusion is a catalyst for a broader spiritual renewal. And I'd love to just talk about that for a minute. Is it possible that Jesus is bringing his gospel to the world in a new way through those who we may judge as being less abled?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think when I sort of began to get outside of, and my wife's mostly responsible. Let me preface it by saying my wife's mostly responsible. She's the one who thought of others. I was thinking about my boys. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I got to take care of my boys. She goes, and I remember one of the times we launched our soccer program, a woman. This is what made it actually expand. A woman came by and was like, hey, could we be a part of this? I said, well, it's really small and I'm trying to take care of my boys here. It's not like a program. Because at that point, I wasn't making it a program. And then I told my wife, she goes, what are you doing? You've got to let
Hmm.
anybody join. I was like, but then I got to do this and I got to do that. So I don't want to get the wrong idea about me. Uh, but I got it in my Bible. And I think this is what every minister has to do, or a woman, man, whatever. Every person who's a leader in the church has to do. I got it in my Bible and I noticed it. And I don't know why I hadn't noticed it before. Is that so many of the interactions Jesus had were with people who had unique disabilities and challenges, whether they were blind or they were lame, or they were just sick, and he
Hmm.
healed them. And of course, we all go, well, I can't. I'm not going to go around healing people, but that's not actually true. We can. Inclusion heals people. 40% of adults with disabilities report being isolated and alone, and that means that if you are with them, you've healed them of their loneliness, and so that's a real thing. So I think that what I would say probably in my mind, Jeff, is that we forget the mission of Jesus. Maybe I'll speak for myself. I forget the mission, and I start implementing church strategies that I've been taught or trained to do, instead of getting back in the old book there and saying, well, how did he do it? And you already alluded to it strongly, powerfully, and eloquently. He did it through relationships. And he met people where they were. And I think sometimes even guys I work with, they're like, well, these people aren't interested. And I said, well, I was an agnostic. I wasn't interested. If no one had ever built a relationship with me, then I wouldn't be here. And sometimes people aren't interested in church. They think it's boring. And you described me. I wasn't going to go sit somewhere on a Sunday morning for 2 hours to just kind of listen to someone talk and then go home. And that'd be the experience. I can have more fun going to a Celtics game because I was in Boston, or going to a Patriots game because I was in Boston. And so I think it's important and essential that ministers get the Bible out and say, actually, let me reclaim the mission of Jesus. Let me reclaim how he did it. It wasn't just through apologetics and being able to prove we're right about something. Because the reality of the matter is, there are a lot of smart people out there that are ready for that argument. And you can be arguing until the end of time. But the one argument that never fails, according to 1 Corinthians 13, is love. Love is the one that never fails. And when you show people love and they see it, our church, I'll give you a great example. We had a big event for e-soccer program, and we were out there doing all the stuff with all the kids. And a couple came walking up to me, or someone brought them up to me and said, hey, they wanted to talk to you. They were asking who runs this. And I said, hello. And they said, we just want to let you know that we've been shopping for a home here in Foster City, California. And it's not a cheap area where we were at. and we decided to buy a home right over there. We're going to buy that home right there. And the reason we're buying it is because we wanted to be in a community that does stuff like you guys are doing.
Wow.
I think it's important that we as Christians understand that some people are going to become Christians now, some are going to become later. Some may never become Christians, but they may be friends of the church. Paul had friends. We don't know that they were Christians. They were influential. But that's how we make a wider impact on the world around us. And I'll add this too, Jeff, is that I'm really focused on ministers, is you've got to let young people lead. We brought people in to the room and said, what do you feel about music? That led during the pandemic to a contest we held to write new music. And the
Mm.
top three winners, I think, were all Gen Z people. They won it. And we now sing those songs in our church. We
Wow.
had 10 winners, and we sing all those songs in our church. We ask questions about, what do you want church to be like? I'm not trying to be president of the United States and vote. That wasn't the point. The point was, I need to look at my age and say, I'm in a certain place. I didn't grow up with screens. I didn't grow up with TikTok, which I'm glad I didn't, but I didn't grow up with TikTok. I didn't grow up with X. I didn't grow up with all these things they have. Their attention span, I've had to simplify and shorten my sermons because they're not ready to sit there and hear the whole history of Deuteronomy and six scriptures, and the language behind it. They're not ready to hear that. And I can either reject that or I can accept that. How have I learned all this as a minister and change? By being involved with these kids and helping special needs kids and adults. I end up in all these conversations like you have, and I learn things that they wouldn't tell me in church. They
Yeah.
might go, "This is more exciting than being at church," and I'm like, well, I'm glad, but that's a problem. So we got to fix that problem. And so what you're doing with your work is direct. It directly impacts my life because these kids that get a right worldview, and by right I mean a compassionate, empathetic, principled, faith-based worldview that allows them to be accepting, tolerant, but also mission-minded and purposeful, not alone, but together. That kind of worldview changes the world, and it changes the world of my kid. My kids are better because they're around Christians who aren't just going to church. They're on a mission to be a certain kind of person that brings light into a dark world. And that's why my kids are better off. And I'm motivated because I want every special needs kid, everybody, we didn't even talk about mental health, everyone who's has the challenge of mental health problems. I want them to be in a world filled with people like you're training that are going to be able to, whether they understand it or not, reach out like Jesus did and touch a life, and in touching that life, end isolation, distance, and produce the kind of inclusion I think that makes the world a better place, and is not just arbitrarily trying to include, every single person who feels like they are isolated, but people who can't do anything about their isolation.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's very little about truth that is communicated ordinarily beyond arm's length. It's right there with the people who are around you. And that, at Summit, we kind of help people draw DNA double helix picture and say there are two strands here. It's truth and relationship. And that truth and relationship always go together. So we want to communicate the truth in a way that helps people walk with us toward the truth.
Beautiful.
Rather than a way that causes them to feel more distant. And I just love these stories about how the hearts of people in your community have even been softened to the gospel because of the efforts that you take. So I'm really heartened by this. I love it. We're going to share about in the when we do the close here. I'll give you all the information for anybody who's interested in learning more about what Russ is doing. But man, Russ, thank you for coming on the show today. This has been super encouraging.
Well, it's an honor to be with you and to hear about your work and to know what you're doing, because I can guarantee you, as I look at the world and watch what's going on, anyone doing what you're doing and what your students are doing and all those connected are doing, maybe they don't know it, but they're impacting people like us in the Bay Area, where you want young people moving in who have a view of the world that I think is much more hopeful and optimistic and transformative. And I think it's going to make the world better for my sons, but every single person. So thank you for taking the time, and thank you for your really thoughtful questions too. I do appreciate those.
Well, it's great to get to meet you, Russ, and really praying blessings on the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to my guest, Russ Ewell, for coming on the show. You can go to russewell.com to find more of his resources, RussEwell, russewell.com. This podcast today is brought to you by Summit Ministries. We are the people who equip the next generation and the parents and the mentors and leaders who guide them to know God's truth and live out a biblical worldview. We want to invite the 16 to 22-year-olds in your life to come study with us for these epic, life-changing 12-day programs in Colorado and in South Carolina. We also have tools and resources to help people who help people, who train the trainers, so to speak. All of this is available at summit.org. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.